To day 17. So again, we had a great discussion on the floor. Senator Andrigh, we're talking about a lot about land use planning, and so I thought it was a good discussion on the floor today. This is the second time we've had that bill in front of us, and it's a lot of good debate on that. So I'll open it up for questions. Oh, here's Senator Harper. Come on up here, Wayne. Either spot.
Any key takeaways on what that affordable housing debate is going to look like in the coming years from what you've seen on the Senate floor? What do you see as the big issues to addressing that issue longer term?
Well, one of the issues, if you look at, we met as a caucus before the session started in December, and again we talked about our priorities. And out of the list of priorities from caucus members came education, but as number one priority, but right behind it was infrastructure. And infrastructure is tied to land use planning. And if you do smart land use planning, you probably you can lower the cost of the infrastructure. And we all know, you've heard kind of transit nodes, and you've heard density around transit nodes and walkable communities and those type of things. And if you can develop that type of a traffic pattern, you can reduce the infrastructure costs. So I think in the bill, I think it's trying to use a little bit of a carrot. My understanding of it is trying to give extra money for those cities that do that type of smart land use planning to try to reduce infrastructure costs, because that's one of the big challenges we have in state government.
One of the things I've noticed up here is, you can't legislate behavior, but a lot of times you can legislate to stimulate discussion about change. You take an example, water. So in my areas, I've got 3 basins that are mining the aquifer. State engineer comes down, scrutinizes, said we're going to, put a water use management plan in, and all of a sudden people come up with creative ideas of, recharge projects and, more efficient sprinklers. Well, the same thing with housing. I think by drawing attention to it, I think you're going to see over the next couple of 3 years, you're going to see some really innovative ways to reduce the cost of housing and make cities and counties to be more efficient in their discussions. So I think that'll stimulate. I think that's the real benefit that will come out of it, is stimulating those kind of conversations.
The bill now includes, it lets cities waive impact fees or lower those as one of those 24. Do you see a place for more directly addressing the impact fees situation at the city level? It's something the legislature's taken up in the past. Is there room for that now?
I think there'll probably always be discussion for how to handle impact fees as we look at you're hearing it now with Lake Powell Pipeline. One of the funding sources for the Lake Powell Pipeline is impact fees and user fees. I think that discussion will probably be around again as long as we're here. I think they have an impact. I may, there's even discussion about it as we talk about tax reform as to how those impact fees may be handled. So I can't imagine there won't be. We'll see what happens. Okay.
Impact fees. We want to remember the reason they're put in place. They're not put in to penalize nor to create more money for the community. The community has to go through quite a process to develop a plan that puts the fee in, so it's a fair process.
Senator Yamamoto up here by me.
And I think everyone would like them lower, but if the plan has been, or the process has been followed, hopefully they're fair, because the process is fair. I worked with the other side of this for a long while as a mayor. In fact, we put the first impact fees into the state of Utah in Layton City back in the early 90s. And we went through the process, and of course there's a lot more fees to build a house in Layton City now than there used to be. But and it's because it's been added to what impact fees. But it's not fair to attach the cost of new development to the old timers who've been there paying the taxes for years and years, and that's the idea behind it. So we'll see how this works out. There's there's a lot of ways you can make housing affordable, and this is maybe one of those keys, or one of those things that we can use.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Lisa.
Can we move on to Senator Harper's bill, the sales tax cuts? Can you talk, Senator, about how that fits into this tax modernization discussion that's been ongoing?
Okay.
Broadening the tax base to stabilize sales taxes rather than just cutting the rate?
So if you go back to 2000, the year 2000, when the state of Utah got involved with remote sales tax collection, making sure that every taxpayer and every transaction and every business were treated the same, we adopted a principle, unlike other states, that the policy and the equitable treatment was far more important than the revenue. And that the people who are participating in this, who are paying the taxes, should see a benefit when remote sales tax collection is authorized. Back in 2013, we ran Senate Bill 58, which codified that says when the remote sales tax is collected either by authorization of the Supreme Court or by Congress, we would go through and do a commensurate sales tax reduction. So this is going through Senate Bill 99, deals solely with the commitment that was made in that 2013 bill. Is a part of the discussion? Absolutely, it has to be part of the discussion. But it is lowering the rate from 4.7 down to 4.55, if I remember correctly. But it lowers it to offset the new revenue that we're coming in, so everybody benefits from the collections that are coming in. It will be part of the dialogue with both the House and the Senate, Governor's office coming in. It is something that needs to be on the table, though.
Why, though, was the tax break given to manufacturers last year? That was talked about as the use for that new online sales tax money. So there are folks who say that benefit has already been extended to taxpayers. Why now go and reduce the rate again when you've already spent that money in essence?
As you're aware, the money that has come in is over $200 million. And the manufacturing tax break was estimated to be somewhere between $55 and $60 million. That goes towards reducing or eliminating the tax on business input, so we are not pyramiding taxes. Okay? So we took that out of the bill. So the bill is really only about $150 million in tax cuts because we've already acted on part of it. The rest of this will go across the board to everybody, whether it's a business or an individual who pays taxes.
But that bill from 2013, SB 58, didn't that speak of money collected as a result of action by Congress or the Supreme Court, when the bulk of the money that's coming in is a result of that deal with Amazon that was done by the state?
Well, yeah, and we have a lot of that. I mean, there's the tax commission has probably been the most aggressive one on going out and attempting to go through and collect or implement voluntary collection agreements. So yes, there's a policy call. Do we go through and say from when they started that, or is it of the effective date of January 1 of 2018 from Senate Bill 2001 of the special session? Those are all the things. I took the amount that I thought we should be discussing, and then we'll go through and through the negotiations, we'll go through and see what is the equitable amount and how that plays in with all the other tax modernization discussions that are going on.
Right, because with tax modernization, the whole idea is to stabilize the sales tax base, and just cutting it does the reverse of that, right? I understand you're trying to honor this previous deal, but if you just cut it and don't extend it, don't broaden the base, you're actually hurting the stabilization process, right?
Well, I would go through and say we're just fulfilling a commitment that was made. It does reduce the amount of revenues, which does affect the programs that can be funded.
Is leadership on board with just a straight up sales tax cut, if that's what it comes down to?
We haven't talked about it, and but I do think it's, again, part of the discussion. But the bigger discussion is exactly, I think, why we're talking about online sales tax is the general fund has had some real challenges with it, whether it be online or a lack of a broadened base. And it's in the state of Utah, we get some income tax, in fact all the income tax, and it goes generally to education. We get very little property tax, which is a stable tax. We fund our government with sales tax, and it's very volatile. So I mean that this is going to be a discussion that's going to go on. I think this is going to be part of it, but whether it's online or and service oriented, I think we have to stabilize our sales tax.
And if this, remind me with fiscal note bills, if your bill passes Senator on 3rd this afternoon, it goes over to the House and it can go through the committee process, but it gets held up on the House
That's
floor,
correct.
right?
Yes.
Until the funding.
Yes.
Okay.
It becomes a tool, you lay the
Yes.
tools out, you lay all the tools out, and then you start
Yes.
piecing it together, piecing the puzzle together, and so it becomes a tool in that discussion.
But that's a really good distinction to make, whether it's a House bill or a Senate bill. If it has a fiscal note, it will be circled over here on 3rd and held until the final days of the session when we determine
Yes.
what's funded, what's not.
So that puts it in that mix of the
It
ongoing
puts it in the
discussions.
mix. It's another tool that we can use as in the broader dialogue.
And if it's not funded, the bill dies and goes away.
Correct.
Okay.
Are you worried about getting support for that when folks don't know what the other pieces might be?
I think there's a comfort level of putting it into the discussion,
Hmm.
but it has to be part of the discussion.
Yeah.
I have a question about affordable housing. Again, back to that. Senator Ibsen, you voted against that today. Why?
Well, I voted against it because it's a greater policy issue of holding the TIF funds hostage for the affordable housing. I'm just not sure that there's a connection. Now, we've got in our House bill or in our Senate bill last year, we had the provision that greater planning was done with, and TIF funds would be available for that, but I didn't feel like it was fair to hold municipalities hostage for their TIF funds based on their performance of affordable housing.
So,
Senator Andrick, we should have invited him in. I don't know if he's anywhere close, but it'd be great to have him in if we're talking about his bill. But go ahead.
so what would be the, what would you feel comfortable with?
Well, I'm not sure, but that particular piece, I just couldn't connect the dots. That's it.
One thing's pretty well guaranteed, we'll see that bill again. It'll be changed in the House, it'll come back here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it won't make it through the House without an amendment. So we're going to have another bite at that apple. So.
What about that broader principle of tying land use planning at the city level with transportation planning at the state level? That seems to be kind of a combined effect of legislation last year and this bill. Is that something that the state should be encouraging the cities to do?
I think we need to encourage them to do it, but we need to be careful that we're not holding them hostage.
And you're probably seeing a little bit of difference. And I wish I knew the percentage. Somebody gave it to me once, but the percent of the population in Utah that lives on the Wasatch Front, basically, about 70. Maybe I've heard it's higher than that. But the quality of life and the infrastructure challenges for the Wasatch Front are a little bit different than they are in rural Utah. And so I think, again, as a state, we try to put policies together, and you see that as best we can do is to give incentives, because one size does not fit all.
Yeah.
And you'll see things different in Parowan than they are in Salt Lake. And I think we just have to acknowledge that, and part of the process. So, other questions?
Can I make one comment on
Go
that?
ahead.
If you look at, one of the
There's-
concepts behind what's
We're gonna
caused
make
this
a-
bill to
make
move
a-
forward is, you've heard about zoning for dollars, a lot of,
Thank you.
well, this may well work the same way. The bill may work the same way, but there's a lot of communities, in fact, I dare say, most of the communities in the state of Utah, this is going to have very little effect on, because they do have a good plan. And their plan, they're balancing people that are coming into the community, they're balancing the size of lots that are being put together. They're balancing the weight of single family versus apartments or multifamily projects. And so there's a lot of this isn't going to make a lot of difference, but this will may counteract the zoning for dollars things that we get into a lot of times with the big store or something, because it would affect the way that they would do things.
Questions of Senator Andrew. He's here now. I don't know if anybody has any more specific questions.
More turbulence in the House?
Yeah, we're expecting some attempts for some modifications, but the two big modifications that I was told that they might try to go after was what we just did today, which was increase the number of requirements, as well as potentially try to go after the B&C road funds.
So the House might try to boost the number of requirements, you think?
Well, that's what they were saying.
Okay.
When we passed Senate, or the third substitute on this bill, we basically worked with the League of Cities and Towns and already went up one for areas that don't have those major transportation investment corridors, and then going up to 4. So we went from 2 to 3 for those that don't have, and then from 2 to 4 for those that do have. Mm-hmm. That was in an effort to kind of say we were taking that option off the table for the House, mm-hmm. quite literally. The B&C road funds, that, from my perspective, that would be a declaration of war. That would be World War III. Mm-hmm. You may have, I think, members of the House that will say, well, that's the right thing to do, but I'd be surprised if they got more than about 20 votes on that, if I'm reading the tea leaves correctly. So, but if we had given them the original second substitute bill, my thought was that they would try to couple those together, mm-hmm. and that would have garnered a lot more support. So I think we took one of the bullets out of the gun, left the other one that I think has probably got a much bigger hurdle. So I think it's better to play defense on that side under this scenario than how we would have under substitute number 2.
So what's the practical effect? If your bill passes, is there a benchmark whereby this many affordable housing units will be created? This would be a success, this would not be a success, this would be a failure. How would you quantify what the net effect is?
That's a very fair question. The reality is when we sat in the commission, these were some of the discussions, was do we actually put a tangible number or percentage requirement upon cities? Mm-hmm. And ultimately through the discussion it was determined that's not a fair benchmark to have, because quite frankly cities don't build affordable housing. They are a partner and they pave the way for affordable housing, and so the first step in my mind was let's just get everybody to have a plan and to actively put that plan into motion. But on the same account, we didn't want to dictate you shall have a plan, it shall look like this, and it shall do that. So that's why we came up with the range of options that we felt like honestly was so broad. It had something that any city in the state was going to be able to adopt, or at least a few of them they were going to be able to adopt. So the way I think we measure success, most importantly in this bill, is the reporting requirement that's in this bill, so that they can come back on an annual basis and say, number 1, we have the plan. Number 2, we've allowed for X amount within our city. And number 3, this is what has actually been built. But we didn't have something held over their head to say if it didn't get built, then we're coming down with a heavy hand of government because they don't build affordable housing.
And Brian, I think you're going to see unquantifiable effects. I've listened and talked to city council members sometimes. I think there's a city in Davis County that said that they don't have a house on the multiple listing service under $300,000.
Yeah.
And they know they've got a problem, but as we talk about it more, you're here covering the problem.
You mind if we just pin that on you?
Yeah,
that'd be great. Thanks.
You've been pinned.
Yeah. And I haven't been pinned for a while, Brian, but we'll have it here. Okay.
Well, we'll do it more
Make
often.
sure it's on.
Yeah,
will
we'll
you?
make sure it's on. We want to get every
Yeah,
word. Every word. All right.
But again, I think you're going to see the more we talk about it, the more the public's going to know, and the more the public knows. I have total confidence, having been a city councilman, I know sitting next to a mayor, former mayor, that as we talk about it, those are duly elected officials, and they see the problem, and they're actually probably engaged. But this will give them more ability to be engaged as I think we try to move forward. So some of it won't be quantifiable, I guess is what I'm saying. But I think you'll see some positive effect.
In your sales tax discussions, has the line between population and point of sale been viewed as giving you leverage on the housing issue? That is, if you shift more towards population, you're going to encourage cities to build more housing?
Yeah, I think that's a discussion that's not part of this bill, but it's a discussion that probably goes on and on.
Yeah.
The last time we did it was several years ago, and there are some cities that are very that have a large sales tax base, and we held them harmless. I think we say we, the legislature, whoever was there then, held them harmless, and they're barely growing out of that hold harmless. So that's a very hard thing to do. People who have got that sales tax base, and it's not 50% right now is population, 50% is point of sale. Those point of sale cities have made infrastructure improvements, bonded, bought fire trucks, increased their police force, and then you try to take away that revenue that they've got to pay their police force or their firemen they put in place to try to take care of those commercial facilities. Very difficult to do. That's a harder, bigger lift, in my opinion. Another issue, though. Other questions? If not, we've had a great discussion here, so appreciate you being here, and we'll be back tomorrow. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
With a
Same
new
time, same
cat.
station.
We'll be back
Now I've
tomorrow
been
with a new
pinned, I'm
cat.
going to turn it off.